every sociologist agrees on, and that's a rare statement, is the fact that over the last 200 years or so in the West, so Europe, Canada, the United States, etc., in the West, for the last 200 years, it has basically been becoming less and less religious. Or, put it in another way, it is becoming more and more secular. There have been little blips on the trend, a certain country over here, a little revival in the faith, or this country here, a revival, etc., or this particular denomination having a rise. But essentially the trend has held, and that has been going on for a couple hundred years now. And I think as we begin this, it's first of all important just to kind of say, it's not stuck in that's going to just keep happening. We believe that we are called to continue to try to work to reverse the trend, and that through the grace of God that may happen someday. So we're not destined to just keep getting worse and worse. But it is important, I think, to acknowledge that that's the case at the moment, and that's the cultural situation that we find ourselves in. I even sent out an email to our parents a couple of weeks ago because I had just read an article, a sociology article, talking about how now children are losing their faith, and even talking about that as early as 10 years old, and that's becoming more and more popular. Whether it's adults or children, the claim being, or the thought being there, that for most of them, the reason they leave, again, is based on science. And they say that, well, what we do here, this Jesus that you talk about, I can't observe him, I can't weigh him or measure him, etc. And so because I can't scientifically study this thing, then it must not be real. I'm only going to believe in what is real. Of course, if you ask them if they love their friend and they say yes, and then you ask them to prove it through measurements, they can't. But that's the case. That's where we're at. And again, more and more people are walking away from Jesus, or walking away from the practice of the faith. And so here I'd first kind of like to make an assertion. The people who are giving up on Christ, the people who are walking away from faith in him, and who are walking away from religion, who are walking away from the Catholic Church, they're doing so while standing on lots of pillars in the society that have come and been built by the practice of faith and the belief in Jesus Christ, and flowing from precisely what we do here. And I'd like to give a couple of examples of those. There are, again, so many ways that our culture is infused with Christianity, is infused with Jesus Christ, is infused with things that have come out of precisely what we're doing here, this celebration of the Mass. And I'd like to list just a couple of those. One of the things is that is a part of our society that people so often take for granted, or just assume that it's there and it always has been and always will be, is this idea of education, right? And not just education for like the really rich person's child is going to bring in some tutor to tutor them, while the vast majority of the world is left in not even being able to read. Here we're talking about an attempt and an effort to educate everyone. The university system itself, that so many of you are a part of, came from and flows out of a belief in Jesus Christ. It was the Catholic Church, and many faithful people who invented the idea of the university and of this idea of education, and this belief that if we educate people, there's nothing to fear. Faith is not threatened by education, but is in fact a great thing that needs to happen and needs to spread as wide as possible. Another great gift that flows from a belief in Jesus and flows from the sacraments and flows from exactly what we do here is the idea of hospitals and healthcare. That was not something that was going on before Jesus showed up on the scene. In fact, there were actual Catholic religious orders that were founded for the sole purpose of saying, we want to care for you, regardless of your faith background, regardless of your income, regardless of your status. We, in fact, not just care for you like when I have a few minutes. People are coming forward and giving their life and saying, because of Jesus, because of my Catholic faith, I want to give my life for all of you who are sick, all of you who are suffering. I want to care for you. I don't care if you have leprosy. I don't care what it is that you have. I want to care for you. Entire orders of people coming forward to do that and to give their life for that because of their belief that Jesus Christ is real, that the sacraments are real, that he comes to us in the Mass. It flows out of that. And so often we forget that, or we just sort of take it for granted that that's all stuff that's just always been that way. And it hasn't. And so I wonder if people that are walking away and saying, you know what, I don't really need Jesus. I don't really need religion. I don't really need these things. Would they also give back all the things that religion has given to them? They say, well, you know, I pray and I stopped praying and I didn't get hit by lightning. My life didn't get worse. I stopped going to Mass and I didn't get electrocuted. And so, yeah, this isn't something that, you know, God's not saying, look, I'll strike you dead if you stop practicing your faith. But do we really want a society where Christ is not present? Do we really just think that what we're doing here is some sort of superstitious thing that we do for an hour that has no real bearing on the real world, that has borne no real fruit? Another great example is just a word in general that's a very big word, a very overarching word, and that word is charity. Aristotle, who was writing before Christ, talked about virtues, courage, temperance, those sorts of things. Those were the ancient Greeks, other cultures had this idea of virtues. We're not saying that no one was ever good or no one ever tried to be nice before Jesus. But no one had ever talked about, there's no recorded or described, no one has ever spoken about the word charity until Jesus Christ shows up and commands it. Now, what is charity? Charity isn't just putting dimes in the Salvation Army bucket. Charity is much bigger than that, and it's the word that summarizes the gospel. It's a virtue that only God can give us, and it is to love our neighbor as ourselves because we love God. To love our neighbors as ourselves, to sacrifice myself for other people. No one had ever talked about that until Jesus came. And the Catholic Church has been putting that into practice for 2,000 years and try to write down or somehow describe within 100 years of your life, try and just take 100 years. You couldn't in 100 years write down all the ways in which charity has impacted the world. Care for and people stepping forward and saying, I love my neighbor as much as myself. Not just, hey, I'm going to take care of you with whatever I have left over, or I'm going to do this or that. Nope, I love you as my own self. Do those who are walking away from Jesus, those who are walking away from religion, also want to give back all those times and all those ways in which charity has changed and transformed our society? There are so many blessings and so many gifts that God's given, right? This is Christmas season, and yet at the same time we recognize that in our meager gifts that we give to God, He gives us so much more back. And yet so often, like all great gifts, or like a lot of the great gifts, we fail to see them sometimes. And so many people, I think, who are walking away from the faith fail to recognize those gifts. And I think some people think, okay, well, great job, Catholics, for starting universities and hospitals and charity, but we don't need that anymore. We can do it without you. And I would say that it may appear that we could continue to sustain things without the church, without Christ, without the sacraments, without the faith. But I think what it is it's the same thing. If someone dies, their body stays warm for a little while. And I think in the same way, you take Christ out, you take the church out of our society, and very quickly things fall apart. Russia had the church, had education and hospitals and charity, and the communists ruled in. And they tried to do it all themselves without Christ. And look how quickly madness set in. So to pretend that we can just keep these things going, that we don't need the church anymore, the church, Jesus Christ, is the heart that continues to pump blood into our society and make it alive and make it the thing that it is. So people say, well, what good is what we're doing here? What we're doing here has animated and has brought life into our world in ways that we can't even begin probably to fathom. And so this Feast of the Epiphany is so important, right? It's a great celebration. Here's what we hear in the first reading. See, darkness covers the earth, and thick clouds cover the peoples. That's Isaiah admitting and saying, reminding us that he's writing in the Old Testament before Jesus. He's saying, it's dark out there. The whole earth. Things are not good. You know, you hear a lot of like college, I remember in my college introduction to history class, right? It talked about like the Anglo-Saxon tribes before Christians showed up, and you know, the Germanic barbarian tribes and all these, like as if they were sort of like just sitting around eating ham legs and just sort of fishing, and just everything was great, and they were all hugging each other, and you know, it was just beautiful. And then the Christians rolled in and were mean and destroyed everything, and it's been horrible ever since. When it's been the exact opposite. When you look at the actual historical record, wherever Christ has not been, it has been dark. That's not to say that there weren't nice people, and that's not to say that the church has been perfect, right? People acting on behalf of the church have done things imperfectly and even sinfully at times. But the darkness is the basic experience wherever Christ is not at. You can even look at societies and cultures today where Jesus is not present. It's darkness. It's thick clouds that cover the peoples. St. Paul, I think, even suggests, in the second reading, we see something very important. He's writing to this first or second generation of Christians, and already it sounds like they have forgotten the darkness. Already they're tempted to kind of say, well, I don't know if we need this Jesus stuff. I don't know if we need this religion thing. I think we can do it on our own. We can have a really great society without. Because what does St. Paul say? He's saying, this message was not made known to people in other generations. It wasn't known as it has now been revealed. He's saying, guys, this wasn't everyone's experience. How quickly we forget the darkness. And what does Isaiah continue? When he talks about the darkness, he has this though. He says, but upon you the Lord shines, and over you appears his glory. Nations shall walk by your light. Isn't that exactly what's happened in our nation? Isn't that exactly what's happened in the West overall? Our nations have walked by the light of Christ, and because of that, so many good things have happened because of that. These magi that we celebrate today, they knew a world of darkness. They came from a long way away, and they were searching for a way out. And they represent all of us who come from all over the world. A world that didn't know charity, a world that didn't know education, a world that knew violence. They came searching for a way out, and they found a child. Let us never forget all the light that Christ brings to us, to our society, and to us in relationship with him. Let us never take it for granted, and let us never leave it behind.